Graham, in recent years, I've thoroughly glommed on to the whole consciousness thing. I've been really boring in on it. There would be other shows you could listen to that would demonstrate that to you graphically. I've really been on to consciousness. Now, I agree with you on DMT. It's a shortcut, but in mass, it's not going to occur. We're not going to change a lot of minds with DMT. People are just going to realize it can be done. Some will do it, but most won't. So if we're going to get a big change, anything that's going to save our butts, it's going to have to come almost like a switch being thrown for human brains all around the world. Is there any way that you see that that might happen?
Yes. Well, first of all, let me just address the DMT issue a little further, because one thing that we now know, which we didn't know 20 years ago, is that the human brain, and specifically the pineal gland inside the human brain, the so-called third eye, the pineal gland produces DMT, dimethyltryptamine. So all of us, every single person listening to this program, whether they like it or not, right now has an illegal drug inside their bodies, which is produced by their own brains, and we don't know why it's there. It's produced in such minute quantities that it doesn't normally give most of us visionary effects, but it can spontaneously overproduce at some time. Now, there's a scientist at the University of New Mexico, Dr. Rick Strassman,
right,
who was the first American scientist to be given permission for more than 20 years to work with hallucinogens and human volunteers in the 1990s. And Rick Strassman did an 8-year research program with a large number of volunteers, giving them small doses of you only need a very small dose of DMT. And these individuals had extraordinary experiences of encounters with beings and entities, which in many cases, around about 80% of the cases, were identical in every respect to the experiences of encounters with beings and entities that UFO abductees report. Except we know that in the case of the volunteers in Rick Strassman's project, they were not being abducted physically by UFOs because they were lying right there on a hospital bed under the watchful eyes of Dr. Strassman himself. But their consciousness was going to some place where it was having these encounters and experiences. And after a number of years of consistently, again and again and again and again, getting the same reports from different volunteers of encounters with the same entities, the same kind of entities in the same kind of situation, Rick had to begin to ask himself, why is this happening? If these things are just hallucinations, which are supposedly just concocted and cooked up by the brain, then you'd expect everybody to have different experiences related to their own life experiences, their own past history. And what's stunning is that they all have the same experiences, and these experiences are extremely similar to the experiences of encounters with beings and entities reported by UFO abductees. So what Rick was suggesting, to cut a long story short, is that people who have the UFO abduction experience, in many cases, are people who spontaneously overproduce DMT, puts them into a visionary state, and allows them access to these other realms. And it's very important to be clear that what he is saying is not that the DMT causes or creates these experiences, simply that it allows these experiences in.
Yes, but his research could be used for either argument, and I bet it is being used for either argument.
Yes, it can. Well, it can be. I think his research is absolutely intriguing, particularly when you cross-correlate it, as I have done in Supernatural, with experiences from all over the world, particularly what shamans are doing and experiencing. And I myself went down to the Amazon to drink the hallucinogenic brew, ayahuasca, which contains DMT, by the way, that has been drunk by shamans in the Amazon for tens of thousands of years. And the reason that shamans drink this brew is that they believe that it opens a secret doorway inside their minds that allows them to project their consciousness through into other realms where they meet intelligent entities that communicate with them and teach them. So what I'm saying is that these experiences, these transforming experiences, are in fact available to all of us. We have our own body chemistry has already provided us with the vehicle to do that. And it may be that something to do with the DMT that exists in all our bodies may indeed sweep over the world and allow a change of consciousness to take place. And again, it's very important to emphasize that these experiences called hallucinations, called visions, we actually don't know what they are. One of the aspects of mind control in our society today has been that the governments have allowed so little work and so little serious research into the possibility that altered states of consciousness may be the route to proving the supernatural and the paranormal, far more effective than chintzy little instruments like ghost meters. What we need to do is to retune the receiver wavelength of our brains. Our brains are the most fantastic instrument we shall ever have, and right now, and this serves the interests of our governments, we're only using a tiny fraction of the potential of our brains.
Well, that's fascinating. Would you describe a simultaneous release of DMT in brains around the world as an evolutionary leap forward?
I would indeed, and I believe that this evolutionary leap forward occurred before. That's why I call my book Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind. There's a fascinating moment in the archaeological record just prior to about 40,000 years ago when it's as though a light is switched on in the human brain all over the world pretty much at once. And I suggest that it was a change in consciousness that took place then, and that it may well have been mediated by brain chemistry in the form of DMT, that it may be an agent. And you see, we have to ask ourselves, why do our bodies make this substance? Science is not able to find any function for it. It's very interesting that this substance is produced by the pineal gland. If you go back into the evolutionary history of the pineal gland, and if you look at it in evolutionary older animals, such as lizards, for example, you'll find that their pineal gland is actually an eye. It has a lens. Now, in more evolved creatures like ourselves, the pineal gland has moved deeper into the brain. It ceased to be light sensitive. It no longer has a lens, but maybe it is still an organ of perception. And maybe the medium through which it perceives reality is dimethyltryptamine, is DMT, that's a kind of lens that allows us to access other realities. And it's astonishing how once you begin to look at things this way, you can realize that virtually every supernatural experience that has ever been charted, including the alien abduction experience, which I rank along that line, has to do with a change of consciousness. Now, this doesn't mean that there isn't a physical reality to these experiences. There certainly are physical, measurable consequences of the alien abduction experience and the sightings of UFOs, for example. I just think that we don't need to jump to the conclusion that these are spaceships from other planets in this physical universe. I think we may be dealing with entities that have developed a technology that can cross the barriers between dimensions. I think that would be much more likely to explain the physicality of these experiences, that they've found a way to flood into our universe, that there are beings, entities out there who are profoundly interested in the human race. Some of them positive, some of them negative. But it may be that there's some help waiting for us out there at the level of consciousness.
Graham, are you able to describe the experience you had in Brazil?
Yes, I've had multiple experiences now. I've drunk the shamanic brew ayahuasca 18 times, 11 times in the Amazon and 7 times in other locations around the world, including in Japan and here in Britain. And what's extraordinary about it is that it plunges you into a seamlessly convincing parallel world where you meet intelligent beings. And amongst the beings that I met in the Amazon were entities of the type that would be described as greys in the modern UFO literature. And this was really surprising to me because prior to that, I had never been interested in UFOs or alien abductions. And I suddenly found myself confronted by a being of this sort in my visual field. I was sitting in a jungle hut, but my consciousness was interacting with this other entity. Very often, what you see in ayahuasca visions are serpents. Serpents appear again and again. This is astonishingly well documented. The professor of psychology at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Dr. Benny Shannon, is one of the world's leading experts on ayahuasca. He has actually drunk ayahuasca more than 300 times himself. And he has compared the experiences of hundreds and hundreds of people from all different parts of the world, from the Amazon, from the industrialized countries. And what he's found is that all of these people meet the same entities and receive teachings from them, which very frequently, they say, transform their lives. I can honestly say that my encounters with these entities in the ayahuasca experience has definitely transformed my life. It's caused me to think again about all sorts of knee-jerk issues that I never examined before in my life, about my own behavior, about the way I relate to others. I've had to reconsider everything about my life, and I've had to reconsider the nature of reality, that we cannot simply say that reality is this physical world that can be weighed and measured and counted. Maybe this physical world is just a tiny slice of an overall much larger reality, which is our birthright, but which our intense focus on day-to-day life is just preventing us from accessing. We can all get there, but we are so tuned in to what Rick Strassman calls channel normal that it's very difficult for us to get there, and that we may need help. But the potential is there within us. The potential is there to access other realms and beings. It's played a huge part in the story of human evolution, and I believe it can play a huge part in our evolution again. And right now, with the policies that our governments have, which restrict our consciousness in so many ways, legislate against what we as sovereign adults may experience, flood our brains with the pap of mindless reality television from morning to night, flooding our consciousness with that. All of this is preventing us from accessing these other realms. But the potential is there, and it can turn around very fast when it happens.
Well, what proves all this would be the similarities, Graham, and how deep really are the similarities of the experiences that people have had in Strassman's work, in any other reporting on the use of this stuff? How really similar are they?
Astonishingly similar and astonishingly deep, and we don't only need the relatively small amount of work that scientists have been allowed to do in order to understand this, because one of the things that I do in Supernatural is go back to the painted caves, the very beginning of human spirituality. The very first time that we can recognize ourselves as human in the archaeological record is the time that our ancestors start making paintings on the walls of caves more than 35,000 years ago. And what those paintings show are beings and entities of the type that shamans in the Amazon or in Central Africa experience today in altered states of consciousness. Very recognizable entities and beings. Very, very often, these supernatural beings are shown as part animal and part human in form.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There's actually a technical term for that. They're called therianthropes, and I may use it again in this discussion. And that's from the Greek therion, which means wild beast, and anthropos, which means man, a combination of wild beast and man. In other words, not the kind of being who you meet in everyday life. People in altered states of consciousness in the lab experiments at the University of New Mexico and deep in the Amazon jungle meet beings like this all the time. I've met them myself again and again, repeatedly, while drinking ayahuasca. And interestingly enough, people who have the UFO abduction experience very frequently meet hybrid beings of the same type, who are part animal, part human. Often they appear first in that form before shape-shifting into the more familiar form of greys. Sometimes they're part insect, part human, but there's a universal human experience going on here, and our science is making a terrible mistake by just dismissing it all as illusions and hallucinations. There's a reality to this, and the reality is confirmed by the absolute universality of this experience, not only between cultures today, but going back deep into prehistory, more than 30,000 years ago. We can see the earliest documentation of encounters of this sort.